Orpheus Descends is a solo adventure by Birgit Röscheisen. The game is for 10 ages and above, takes about 30 minutes, and has a very tiny footprint. And here we have all the components. 4 dice, Orpheus of course, and the card. And finally we have some resources which represent Orpheus' emotions: anger, sorrow, harmony and trust. The front side of the card represents the world above. The back side is the Underworld, where Orpheus has to descend all the way down to Hades and persuade him with the saddest singing to let Eurydice go and make it back alive with her to the world of the living before time runs out, in order to win the game. You start in the world above. Place Orpheus on the grave, remove the white die, we'll need it later in the Underworld, and take 2 anger and 1 trust to set up the game. On your turn you will roll and place the dice one after another. Roll the first black die, the other black die, and at last blue die, and after each roll you place them immediately at one of the slots at the bottom of the card. The position of the blue die determines how many steps Orpheus will go. None, 1 or 2 steps. He moves along the arrows around and around, and each time you pass this arrow you have to pay 1 resource from the hope area. And here's the despair area. Resources will move from hope to despair, and that's a kind of timer in the game. If you run out of hope, you lose. Eurydice just died, and Orpheus is standing at her grave and is in rage. She has been bitten by a snake, or other versions of the story say a shepherd has chased and raped her. But one way or the other he's in rage. And anger, the red cubes, are easy to get in this game. But you have to transform them into sorrow and into harmony. With harmony you will be able to sing again, and so to descend to the Underworld and persuade Hades to let Eurydice go. Okay, so let's start. The first die is a 5. We'll put it here. The second black die is a 2 over here. And finally the blue one, a 4, we'll put here. And now we'll activate the dice from left to right. The first spot is the upgrade, where you can upgrade resources to the next better type, from red to black and black to yellow. The blue one's trust will come into play in the Underworld. In this case we could transform 2 anger into 1 sorrow, or if we had 2 sorrow into 1 harmony. The second slot is anger. You get as many anger as there are pips on the die. In this case I get 4 anger. If there aren't enough, you don't get anything. And finally the max slot is a limit, the maximum resources you are allowed to keep. In this case 5. And finally Orpheus moves. The blue die is in the second spot. So we have 0, 1, 2 steps, in this case indicated by the little arrows above the dice. We have 1 arrow, so Orpheus moves 1 step down to home. And at the end of our turn, we have to place a resource on the leftmost free spot of that location. In this case we need red, so we put 1 of our anger at home. If we didn't have anger, we would have to spend 1 anger of the hope area and move it to the despair area. If we can't do so, we lose immediately. When you roll and place your dice, you already have to consider on which location you want to end your turn, so where to put the blue die, depending on the resources you have. Here in the woods we need harmony, as you can see, but we don't have any. In this case you can use trust as a joker. You have to exchange the trust with a corresponding resource next time you visit that location. Here you can see Orpheus is not going to move because blue die is in the first slot, and we already have the corresponding resource, the harmony. But a 1 in the upgrade slot, I just don't want to sacrifice. So I could either turn anger into sorrow, or even better, sorrow into harmony. That's possible because you can use resources on your location to upgrade, or a mixture of resources you have and resources on your location. So let's do that. But as you can see, we don't have any sorrow anymore to put it on the current location. So we have to spend 1 sorrow from the hope area and move it to the despair. So now let's skip a few turns. Here we have a situation near the end of the world above phase. There's almost no hope left. 1 anger and a trust, and we have to make sure to move down to the underworld soon. There are 2 ways to manipulate your dice. Spend any resource, that means move it from hope to despair, to either turn a die to its backside, or make 2 dice switch positions. I didn't have to in this case, because the dice don't have a lot of meaning in this turn. There's nothing in the hope area to upgrade to anymore, and I don't get anger either. And as you can't take anger down to the underworld, if there are the frightening shadows around you, all anger will melt. It doesn't matter if I have to reduce to 2 cubes, so 1 harmony and 1 anger. I just need the harmony. When a location is full, if it contains 3 cubes, we can take them with us at the end of our turn. So now we'll move 1 step to the woods and take the sorrow of the temple with us. We've been activating this die before. We don't have to reduce now. We have to move another step, exactly 1 step, to the cave in the top right corner and take the harmony with us to move down to the underworld. Let's say we still had some anger. So now let's descend, the setup for the second part of the game. Remove all anger. Anger have a different meaning in the underworld. They are the shadows. Place them left side of the card. All other cubes you are allowed to keep. From the hope area, you only keep the trust that's still there. All other cubes are removed from the game. We need at least 3 harmony to descend to the underworld, so that's quite comfortable what we have here. Place the white die at the timeline on the left side of the card, below the field number 1. And place Orpheus at the top right corner on the card. In the underworld, you roll all 3 dice together. Place them in ascending order to determine how many steps Orpheus will move. Like in the world above, he moves 0, 1 or 2 steps. In this case, none. Then we assign each die to one of the slots above the card. Let's take the 3 for time, so the timer goes 3 ahead. And the 5 as shadows. Depending on Orpheus' position, we look at the 3x3 grid at the top of the card or at the bottom. If Orpheus is above the river, like now, we look at the 3x3 grid on top of the card and place 5 shadows, like shown on the pips of the die. Let's say we had a 3, so we rotated that the pips match the orientation shown on the card. So we had these 3 shadows, and these 2 weren't there. Because of the symmetry of the 5, we don't have to rotate here. And finally we place the 6 at the last spot, and place a resource at the corresponding spot at the edge of the card. If there already is a resource, instead of setting, we unset it and take it back to Orpheus mood. That's our supply. On your way down towards Hades, before you reach Charon, you always have to set harmony. Later on, you can use any resource. Make sure to unset your harmony in time before you reach Charon or Hades to be able to sing for them. And this was the first turn. So let's see what comes next. We have 1, 2, 4, so we sort them, that's one step. And Orpheus lands on a shadow. If he's still there on the end of our turn, we lose a resource. So there's a 1, that's always a good idea for the time. 2, well, as well the 2 as the 4, if we use them as shadow, are already set. But there's one thing we can do. Setting resources don't just take them away from you, they protect fields from shadows. So we use the 1 to set a resource, so the 2 for the time. The 4 shadows are already in place. Now set the 1. We have to set harmony because we didn't cross the river yet. And then we can remove this shadow because as well in its row as in its column there's a resource. Otherwise we would have replaced the shadow by one of our resources. Any of our resources. Only if we return from Hades on our way back, we have to use trust to replace shadows because we don't want to turn around or we lose. Now Orpheus again lands on a shadow. This time there's no protection by set resources. So we have to replace that shadow by one of our resources. This resource will stay there until the end of the game, but the field is protected from now on. A few turns later, Orpheus is standing at the Styx, the underground river, and has to sing for Charon to escort him to the other side. To sing for Charon, you have to spend 1 harmony. Later on, to sing for Hades, you need 2 harmony. Now the problem is that either with a 3 or a 5, I'd have to set another resource, another harmony, as I'm still on this side of the river. But I need my harmony. So the only choice to succeed is to unset one of the harmonies at the slots 1 or 6 to be able to sing. So we have to manipulate our dice to get a 1 or a 6. You can either re-roll 1 die for the cost of 1 time or re-roll all 3 dice, which cost 2 time. In the meantime, Orpheus is descended deeper and deeper and now is preparing to sing for Hades. So we have to unset that harmony. And later, on your way back up, I already told you you have to replace shadows with trust instead of any resource. How to get trust? One trust we already have, because it has been an Orpheus mood when we descended, but the other trust we can get by setting resources. Whenever you unset a sorrow, you take it back to Orpheus mood as usual and set a trust of the supply instead, which you can unset later on. I haven't explained the timeline yet. Whenever you spend time, you move the die upwards. If you move it beyond the 7, you must increase it, all additional steps don't count, and reset it to 0. If your die already has a value of 6, when you exceed the 7, you lose immediately. There's only one way to win the game. You have to descend all the way down to Hades and return back to the exit in the top right corner. When you reach the exit, you win immediately. Though there are several ways to lose the game. You lose the game if you run out of time, if you can't spend a resource for Charon or Hades, you have to use harmony there, or if you can't set a resource On your way down towards the river, you have to use harmony if you have it, otherwise any resource. You also lose if you land on a shadow and don't have the matching resource. On your way back up, it has to be trust, or you turn around and lose Eurydice forever, otherwise use any resource to face the shadows. So thank you for watching and good luck.